Most people did not notice her when she walked into her room. She was not loud, not flashy, and not the kind of person who demanded attention. She moved through life quietly, as if she had learned long ago that being unseen was safer. Her clothes were simple, her voice soft, and her eyes often stayed on the ground. Too many. She was just another ordinary young woman trying to get through the day. She lived in a small apartment where the walls were thin, and the windows rattled when buses passed by. The place was nothing special, but it was where she felt most at peace. In the corner of her living room sat an old piano. The wood was scratched, and a few keys were slightly worn, but it was the most important thing she owned. It had been with her for years. Through hard times and quiet nights when she felt alone, she never talked much about the piano. Not because she didn't love it, but because every time she did, people reacted the same way. Some smiled politely, as if listening to a child talk about an impossible dream. Others laughed, not cruelly, but enough to make her feel small. They would say things like, "That's nice," or "Music is a hard world," before changing the subject. After a while, she stopped bringing it up. Her days followed a simple routine. Wake up early, get dressed, and head to work. The job paid just enough to cover rent and food. It wasn't something she was passionate about, but it was steady. At work, she did what was asked and nothing more. She didn't complain, and she didn't try to stand out. People knew her as reliable, quiet, and forgettable. When coworkers talked about their plans or dreams, she listened more than she spoke. Sometimes during lunch breaks, she would sit alone and scroll through her phone. Videos of talented musicians often appeared on her screen. People playing in grand halls, on big stages, with bright lights and cheering crowds. She watched carefully, studying their hands, their posture, the way they lost themselves in the music. A small part of her wondered what it would feel like to be that brave. But bravery had never come easily to her. Growing up, she learned early that showing too much of herself invited judgment. At school, she was teased for being quiet and awkward. When she once played music for a small group, someone laughed and said she wasn't very good. The words stayed with her longer than the memory of the song itself, so she practiced alone. Late at night, when the city noise faded and the world felt calmer, she sat at the piano and played softly. Her fingers moved with care, almost afraid to make mistakes. The music filled the room, gentle and honest. In those moments, she felt like herself. No pressure, no judging eyes. Just sound and feeling. The piano had been a gift from someone who believed in her when few others did. That person was gone now, but the piano remained. Every time she played, it felt like a quiet conversation with the past. A reminder that at least one person had seen something special in her. Still, doubt followed her everywhere. It sat in her chest during the day and whispered to her at night. It told her she wasn't talented enough, not confident enough, not the kind of person people wanted to hear from. Sometimes she believed it. Other times, she pushed it aside and played anyway. One afternoon, as she walked home from work, she noticed a poster taped to a lamppost. It announced an open community event. Music, poetry, and performances by anyone brave enough to step forward. No experience required. The words caught her attention, and she stopped to read it again. And then again, her heart began to race. The idea scared her, but it also stirred something inside her that had been quiet for too long. An event like that didn't come often. It was close to home, and anyone could join. No judges, no prizes, just people and a stage. She tore off one of the small contact tabs at the bottom of the poster and slipped it into her pocket. The whole walk home, her mind was loud with questions. What if she embarrassed herself? What if people laughed again? What if she forgot everything she practiced? When she reached her apartment, she sat on the edge of her couch and stared at the piano. The room was silent. She didn't touch the keys that night. Instead, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the poster. The next day at work, she couldn't focus. Numbers blurred together, and conversations faded into background noise. All she could think about was that stage. She imagined standing there, alone, under lights, with people watching. The thought made her stomach twist. At lunch, She almost mentioned it to a coworker, but the words stuck in her throat. She remembered past reactions and stayed quiet. By the end of the day, she had convinced herself it was a bad idea. Dreams were nice, but reality was safer. That evening, she sat at the piano again. Her hands hovered over the keys, unsure. Then she played a simple melody, one she had played many times before. It wasn't loud or fast, but it was honest. As the notes filled the room, her breathing slowed. The fear softened, just a little. She thought about how much time she had spent hiding, how many chances she had avoided because she was afraid of what others might think. The music seemed to answer her thoughts, steady and calm. When she finished playing, she stayed seated for a long time. The room felt warmer, quieter in a good way. She reached into her pocket and took out the small paper tab from the poster. She smoothed it between her fingers and made a quiet promise to herself. She didn't know if she would perform, but she would at least try to show up. That night, for the first time in a long while, she fell asleep with something unfamiliar in her chest. It wasn't confidence and it wasn't certainty. It was a small, fragile sense of possibility. And that was enough to keep her going. She had no idea that soon a single moment would challenge everything people believed about her, or that one simple choice would begin to change the way she saw herself forever. The next few days moved slowly, but her thoughts moved fast. The small piece of paper from the poster stayed folded in her pocket even when she changed clothes. It felt safer there, close to her, like a secret she was not ready to share. Every time her fingers brushed against it, her heart beat a little faster. At work, she tried to act normal, but her mind kept drifting. She replayed small moments from the past. Times when she had almost spoken up but didn't. Times when she had stayed quiet instead of risking embarrassment. She wondered how many chances she had already let slip by. Her coworkers chatted as usual. They talked about weekend plans, family problems, and things she only half listened to. One of them mentioned the community event casually, saying it might be fun to watch. The comment hit her like a sudden wave. She looked up, surprised, but said nothing. No one asked if she planned to go. No one imagined she might want to be part of it. That night, she practiced longer than usual. She closed the windows and turned off the lights, leaving only a small lamp on. The shadows made the room feel smaller, safer. She played the same pieces again and again, stopping when she made mistakes, starting over when her fingers slipped. Sometimes she got frustrated and pressed the keys harder than she meant to. Other times, she played so softly she could barely hear herself. Her emotions moved through the music without asking permission. Fear, hope, doubt, and a quiet longing all mixed together. When she finished, her hands were tired, but her mind was awake. She sat there thinking about what it would mean to play in front of people. Not strangers online, not videos behind a screen, but real people sitting just a few feet away. People who could judge her in real time. The thought scared her, but something else scared her more. The idea of never trying? The day before the event, she almost decided not to go. She told herself she was being unrealistic. She had no formal training, no fancy background, no confidence. Just an old piano and years of quiet practice. She stood in front of her mirror that morning and barely recognized the person staring back. Someone who looked unsure, tired, and ordinary. At work, her hands shook slightly as she completed simple tasks. She dropped a pen and had to bend down to pick it up, feeling foolish for being so nervous over something that hadn't even happened yet. She reminded herself that no one was forcing her. She could stay home and nothing would change. But something inside her resisted that thought. It felt heavy, like a door closing. That evening, she came home early and sat on the floor instead of the couch. The piano loomed quietly in the corner. She didn't play right away. Instead, she listened to the silence. It reminded her of all the times she had chosen comfort over courage. She stood up slowly and placed her hands on the piano keys. She played one single note and let it ring out. It wasn't perfect, but it was clear. She played it again, then again, each time a little steadier. The sound filled the room and made her chest tighten. She thought about the person who had given her the piano, how they used to sit nearby and listen without judging, How they believed effort mattered more than perfection. The memory made her eyes sting, but she kept playing. Later that night, she prepared what she would wear. Nothing fancy. Just clean clothes that made her feel comfortable. She placed them neatly on a chair, then sat on her bed, staring at them like they might disappear if she looked away. Sleep came slowly. Her mind raced with imagined outcomes. People whispering. Someone laughing. Awkward silence after she finished, but mixed in with the fear were other images. A quiet room. Listening faces. A moment where she was fully present. The morning of the event arrived faster than she expected. She woke up with a knot in her stomach and a strange calm underneath it. She moved carefully, afraid that one wrong thought might send her into panic. She ate very little and checked the time more times than she could count. The small paper tab was back in her pocket. She held on to it during the bus ride, staring out the window as the city passed by. When she arrived at the venue, she almost turned around. People stood outside chatting and laughing. Some carried instruments. Others looked confident and excited. She felt out of place immediately, like she had wandered into a world that wasn't meant for her. She stayed near the entrance, unsure of what to do. A volunteer approached her and asked if she was performing or watching. The question caught her off guard. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure it could be heard. Finally, she nodded. The volunteer smiled warmly and handed her a small slip of paper with a number on it. She took it with shaking hands. Inside, the room was bigger than she expected. Rows of chairs faced a simple stage. A piano stood off to the side, its surface polished and bright. It looked nothing like the one at home. For a second, she wondered if she could even play it properly. She found a seat near the back and watched as others performed. Some were very good. Some were clearly nervous. The crowd responded kindly to everyone. But she still felt the pressure building inside her. As each performance ended, her turn moved closer. She wiped her palms on her clothes and tried to steady her breathing. She reminded herself that she could still leave. No one would stop her, but she stayed. When her number was finally called, her legs felt heavy as she stood. The walk to the stage felt long, even though it wasn't. She could feel eyes on her, curious, uncertain. She sat at the piano and adjusted the bench. The keys felt cool under her fingers. She paused, just for a moment, and closed her eyes. In that pause, all the noise faded. The doubt quieted. The room disappeared. There was only her, and the music she had carried for so long. She took a breath, lifted her hands, and prepared to play. The room felt very still when she opened her eyes. The soft noise of people shifting in their seats faded, and even her breathing sounded loud to her ears. She placed her fingers on the keys and waited, not because she had forgotten what to play, but because she needed one more second to gather herself. She reminded herself why she was there, not to impress anyone, not to prove something to strangers. She was there because music had always been her safe place, because she had carried these sounds inside her for years. With no audience at all, her hands trembled slightly as she pressed the first key. The sound was clear and steady. It traveled through the room like a gentle wave. She pressed another key, then another, letting the notes breathe. The piano was different from the one at home. The keys were smoother, lighter. For a moment it distracted her, but she adjusted quickly. As the melody formed, her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing slowed. The fear that had been tight in her chest loosened just enough for her to continue. At first, the audience listened politely. Some people leaned back in their chairs. A few whispered quietly to each other. No one looked impressed, but no one looked bored either. It was the kind of attention that could disappear at any moment. She noticed this without really seeing it. Her focus stayed on the keys and the feeling in her hands. She followed the rhythm she had practiced late at night, the one that had comforted her when no one else was around. Then she played a note that carried more weight. It was slightly deeper, fuller. It wasn't loud, but it held emotion. Something in the room shifted. A man in the front row stopped whispering and looked up. Someone else straightened in their seat. The small sounds of movement grew quieter. She didn't rush. She allowed space between notes, trusting the silence as much as the sound. The music began to tell a story, not with words, but with feeling, longing, hope, the ache of being unseen. Her fingers moved with more confidence now. Not because she suddenly believed she was perfect, but because she remembered how much this music meant to her. Each note felt honest. Halfway through, she made a small mistake. One key landed slightly off. Her heart skipped, and for a split second, panic tried to return. In the past, that would have stopped her. She would have frozen or rushed to cover it up. But this time, she did something different. She kept going. She adjusted the next note and flowed back into the melody. The mistake faded, barely noticeable. The music continued, steady and real. Something changed inside her at that moment. She realized she didn't have to be flawless to be worthy of being heard. The room was very quiet now. No whispers. No shifting. Just listening, she felt it before she saw it. The way people leaned forward, the way eyes stayed fixed on her hands, the way the air seemed thicker, full of attention. She played with more feeling, letting herself be present. She thought about the small apartment, the old piano with worn keys, the late nights when she played softly so no one would complain. All of it poured into the sound. A woman in the second row wiped at her eyes. Someone else clasped their hands together, was unaware they were doing it. She wasn't watching them closely, but she sensed the connection forming. The invisible line between performer and listener that she had only imagined before, as the piece moved toward its end. The melody grew quieter again, softer, more delicate, like a whisper meant for only a few. Her fingers slowed. The final notes hung in the air, fragile and open. When she lifted her hands from the keys, the silence stayed. For a moment, no one clapped. No one moved. Her heart dropped. Doubt rushed back in, sharp and fast. She wondered if she had misread everything. If the quiet meant disappointment, then one person stood up. The sound of applause broke the silence. Gentle at first, then stronger. More people joined in. The clapping grew louder, filling the room. She sat frozen, unsure of what to do. Her face felt warm. Her ears rang. People stood. Not all at once, but enough that she noticed. The applause wasn't wild or exaggerated. It felt sincere, earned. She stood slowly and gave a small nod, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wanted to speak, to say something meaningful, but no words came. As she stepped away from the piano, her legs felt weak. She made it back to her seat and sat down, her heart still racing. The person next to her smiled and whispered that it was beautiful. She nodded, afraid that if she tried to answer, she might cry. The rest of the performances passed in a blur. She listened, but her mind kept replaying the moment she played that first note. The moment she didn't stop after the mistake. When the event ended, people gathered in small groups, talking excitedly. She stayed seated for a while, unsure if she should leave or wait. A few people approached her. They thanked her for the music. One person said it reminded them of something they had lost. Another said it made them feel calm. She listened quietly, humbled by their words. She didn't know how to respond. She simply said, "Thank you." As she stepped outside into the evening air, the city felt different. Brighter, somehow. The noise didn't bother her as much. Her steps felt lighter. She paused on the sidewalk and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, she felt proud. Not because everyone liked her performance, but because she had stayed, she had played, she had been heard, and she knew deep down that this was only the beginning. She walked home that night instead of taking the bus. The air felt cool against her face, and the city lights seemed softer than usual. Every few steps, her mind replayed the sound of the applause, not the loudness of it, but the feeling behind it. It didn't feel like pity or surprise. It felt real. When she reached her apartment, she unlocked the door slowly, half expecting the moment to fade the second she stepped inside. The familiar room greeted her with quiet. The old piano waited in the corner, just as it always had. She set her bag down and stood there for a long time. Then she walked over and touched the keys lightly. Not to play, just to feel them. The contrast between this piano and the one at the venue made her smile. This one felt like home. She sat and played a few soft notes. Not to practice, just to release everything she had been holding in. The music came easily, like a deep breath after a long wait. Later that night, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was short and polite. Someone from the event wanted to thank her again and asked if she would consider playing at another small gathering in a few weeks. Nothing official, nothing big, just an invitation. Her first reaction was panic. She stared at the screen, her heart racing all over again. The confidence she had felt earlier shrank quickly. She told herself the person must be mistaken. Maybe they meant someone else. Maybe they were just being kind. She didn't reply right away. She placed the phone face down and went to bed, but sleep refused to come. Her mind argued with itself. One voice told her this was a chance. Another warned her not to ruin what little courage she had gained. The next morning, she woke up tired but thoughtful. The world hadn't changed overnight. Her bills were still there. Her job still waited for her. But something inside her felt different, like a door had been unlocked at work. People noticed something was different about her, even if they couldn't explain it. She stood a little straighter. She spoke a little more clearly. When someone asked her a question, she answered without apologizing first. During lunch, she checked her phone again. The message was still there, patient and quiet. She typed a response and erased it 3 times before finally sending a simple reply saying thank you and that she would think about it. The days that followed were filled with small moments that felt new. She practiced with more intention, not fear. When she made mistakes, she corrected them without anger. The music felt lighter, freer. She also noticed doubt returning in unexpected ways. Sometimes it showed up as a tight feeling in her chest. Other times it came as thoughts late at night, reminding her of every reason she might fail. One evening, while buying groceries, she ran into someone who had been at the event. They recognized her immediately and smiled. They told her they hadn't stopped thinking about her performance, that it had stayed with them. She thanked them and walked home slowly, letting the words sink in. These were not people who owed her anything. They had no reason to lie. Still, the idea of stepping forward again scared her. One performance felt like a rare moment of bravery. Doing it again felt like pressure. She thought about quitting before she even started. It would be easier to let the memory stay untouched. Easier to say it was just one night, but every time she sat at the piano, the music pulled her back. It reminded her of how alive she had felt. How honest. A week later, she finally agreed to the invitation. Her reply was careful, almost shy, but it was a yes. The second gathering was smaller and more informal. No stage, just chairs arranged in a loose circle. She arrived early and helped set things up, grateful for something to do with her hands. When it was time to play, the nerves returned, but they were different now. Less sharp, more manageable. She reminded herself of the mistakes she had survived before. She played, and once again, the room listened. Not with shock this time, but with trust. She finished and smiled, a real one, before anyone clapped. Afterward, a quiet conversation turned into several. Someone asked how long she had been playing. Someone else asked if she taught lessons. The questions surprised her. She went home that night feeling grounded, not overwhelmed. Like she was slowly stepping into something instead of being pushed. At work, word spread in small ways. A coworker mentioned seeing her name on a local flyer. Another asked if she really played piano. Their tone was different now. Curious. Respectful. She answered honestly, without shrinking herself. Of course, not everyone was supportive. A few people brushed it off, saying it was just a hobby. That real success was rare. Their words stung, but not like before. She realized something important. Those voices had always been there. The difference was that she didn't let them decide for her anymore. One evening, as she practiced, she thought about the future. Not in big, dramatic ways. Just small steps. Another performance. Maybe a class. maybe sharing music more openly. She didn't need everything to change at once. What mattered was that she had changed. She was no longer hiding from the sound of her own voice. Even when it came through a piano, as she closed the lid and turned off the light, she felt calm. The path ahead was still uncertain, but it no longer felt impossible. For the first time, she wasn't asking if she was good enough. She was asking where the music might take her next. Life did not suddenly turn into something perfect after that. She still woke up early for work. She still counted money carefully at the end of the month. The city still moved fast around her. But inside her, something steady had taken root. Music was no longer something she hid. She still played alone many nights, but now she left the window slightly open. She didn't worry as much about who might hear. If someone complained, she would lower the sound, not her confidence. More invitations came slowly, never all at once. A small cafe asked if she would play during a quiet evening. A local group invited her to join a weekend gathering. None of it felt overwhelming. It felt like a gentle opening, one door at a time. The first cafe performance scared her more than she expected. The room was small, and people were close. Some talked quietly, others worked on laptops. She wondered if anyone would listen at all. She played anyway. At first, the sound blended into the background. Then someone looked up. Then another person paused their conversation. The room didn't fall silent like before, but it softened. That was enough. When she finished, the applause was light but warm. The owner thanked her and handed her a small envelope. It wasn't much, but when she held it, her hands shook. It was the first time music had paid her back in any way. She walked home that night smiling to herself. Not because of the money, but because she had shared something honest and lived through it again. At work, changes came slowly. A supervisor noticed her focus and offered her a small responsibility she had never been trusted with before. She accepted without second-guessing herself. When she spoke in meetings, people listened. She realized that courage had a way of spreading. What she learned at the piano followed her everywhere else. There were still hard days. Days when she compared herself to others online and felt small again. Days when a performance didn't go well and she replayed every mistake in her head. But she learned not to run from those feelings. She sat with them, then played through them. One afternoon, she received a message from a young person who had been at one of her small performances. The message was simple. It said hearing her play made them want to start practicing. Again, after giving up for years, she read it 3 times before putting the phone down. That message stayed with her longer than any applause. As months passed, she found herself teaching a few basic lessons in her apartment. Nothing official. Just slow afternoons, simple melodies, and patient guidance. She never claimed to be an expert. She only shared what she knew. Watching others struggle and improve reminded her of her own journey. She was gentler with herself because of it. One evening, same community space from before announced another open event, this time larger than the last. They asked her if she would like to close the night. She sat with the message for a long time. Closing the night meant expectation. It meant attention. It meant standing in front of people who might remember her. She almost said no. Then she remembered the first note. She had played months ago. How everything had changed because she stayed. She said yes. The night of the event, the room was full. Familiar faces mixed with new ones. She felt nervous, but the fear didn't control her anymore. It felt like energy instead of danger. When it was her turn, she walked to the piano calmly. She adjusted the bench and placed her hands on the keys. Before playing, she looked out at the crowd. Not searching for approval. Just acknowledging their presence, she played a piece she had written herself. Simple, honest, shaped by quiet nights and slow growth. The music flowed without force. Each note felt grounded. She didn't rush. She didn't hold back. When she finished, the room stayed silent for a breath. Then the applause came, strong and full. She stood smiling out and bowed her head slightly. This time, she did not feel surprised. Afterward, People approached her with kind words and thoughtful questions. Some asked where she learned to play. Others asked what inspired her music. She answered simply, life, time, listening. Later that night, as she walked home, she passed the same street where she had first seen the poster months before. The lamppost was bare now, the paper long gone. She stopped for a moment and looked up at the light. She thought about the version of herself who had stood there unsure, afraid of being seen. She felt grateful for that person. Grateful she hadn't walked away, back in her apartment. She sat at her old piano and played one final quiet melody before bed. The same one she had practiced in secret for years. It sounded different now, not because the notes had changed, but because she no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. The truth was simple. They once thought she wasn't good, but one note had proven something far greater. She had always been enough. Time moved forward in quiet ways, not with sudden changes, but with small moments that added up. Weeks turned into months, and the memory of that first performance no longer felt sharp or fragile. It felt settled, like something that belonged to her now. Her life found a new rhythm. Work during the day, music in the evenings. Some nights she practiced seriously, focusing on technique and control. Other nights she played whatever came to her, letting her hands wander without a plan. Both felt important. People began to recognize her in small places. At the cafe, at the community space, even once on the bus, when someone tapped her shoulder and asked if she was the one who played piano at a recent event. She nodded, a little shy, and they smiled like they had just met an old friend. She was still getting used to that feeling. Being remembered, not everyone understood her path. Some coworkers still asked why she put so much energy into something that might never become a full career. Others warned her not to get her hopes up. Their words no longer cut deeply, but they still lingered. On nights like that, she returned to the piano. Music had become the place where she sorted through confusion. When doubt crept in, she didn't argue with it. She played through it, letting each note carry what she couldn't say out loud. One evening, after a small gathering, a woman approached her quietly. She said she had stopped playing music years ago because someone once told her she wasn't good enough. Hearing this performance had stirred something she thought was gone forever. She listened carefully, nodding, not interrupting. When the woman finished, she simply said she understood. That music doesn't disappear just because we stop touching it. The woman thanked her and walked away. Wiping her eyes, that moment stayed with her longer than any praise. She began to understand that her music was no longer just about her own healing. It was becoming a bridge for others, even in small ways. At home, her apartment slowly changed. Sheet music stacked on the table. A notebook filled with rough melodies and half-written ideas. The piano bench grew more worn from use. She saved up and had the old piano tuned properly for the first time in years. When the tuner finished and played a few notes, the sound filled the room with new clarity. She laughed softly, surprised by how different it felt. That night she played longer than she meant to. The music sounded brighter, but it still carried the same heart. Her teaching grew slowly too. One student became two. Two became four. She never advertised. People simply passed her name along. She kept the lessons simple and patient, focusing more on feeling than perfection. Watching her students struggle reminded her of her own early fears. When they made mistakes, she smiled and encouraged them to keep going. She meant it every time. One afternoon after a lesson, a student asked her if she had always been confident playing in front of people. She paused before answering. She said no. She said she had been afraid for a long time. That fear didn't disappear. It just stopped being in control. The student nodded thoughtfully, like that answer mattered, as the year went on. She was invited to be part of a small local program that supported community artists. Nothing fancy, just shared spaces, shared ideas, and quiet encouragement. She felt out of place at first, surrounded by people who seemed more experienced. But when she played, the room listened, not with surprise anymore, but with respect. She began writing more of her own music, pieces inspired by everyday moments. The sound of rain against her window, the hum of the city at night, the feeling of sitting alone in a quiet room. Her music didn't try to impress. It tried to be honest. One evening, while sorting through old belongings, she found a faded note from years ago. It was from the person who had given her the piano. The words were simple, encouraging her to keep playing no matter what anyone said. She held the note carefully, feeling a mix of sadness and gratitude. That night, she played a piece just for them. Months later, she was asked to play at a larger public event in the same city, the kind she once would have avoided completely. She thought about it carefully before agreeing. This time, the fear felt familiar, almost welcome, like a reminder that she still cared. On the day of the event, she arrived early and walked around the empty space. She touched the piano keys lightly, grounding herself. When people began to arrive, she stayed calm. She played with ease. Not because it was easy, but because she trusted herself now. The applause was strong. But what mattered more were the faces. Attentive, present, open as she stepped away from the piano. She felt a quiet sense of peace. Not excitement, not disbelief, just peace. Later that night, alone in her apartment, she thought back to the person she used to be, the one who practiced in secret, the one who believed being unnoticed was safer. She understood now that being seen didn't mean being judged. Sometimes it meant being understood. She sat at the piano and played. One soft note. It echoed gently through the room. She smiled. Her journey was not finished. It might never be. But she no longer measured success by approval or praise. She measured it by truth. And every time her fingers touched the keys, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The seasons changed quietly around her. Summer faded into cooler days, and the city took on a slower rhythm. She noticed these things more now. The sound of footsteps on wet streets. The way light rested on old buildings in the evening. Life felt fuller, not louder. Her routine stayed simple, but it no longer felt small. Mornings at work passed with focus instead of counting minutes. Evenings belonged to music, lessons, or quiet reflection. She learned that growth did not always announce itself. Sometimes it happened while you were busy living. One afternoon, she was asked to speak briefly at a small gathering for people interested in learning music later in life. The idea surprised her. She had never seen herself as someone others would want to hear from, especially without a piano in front of her. She almost refused. Then she remembered how many times she had wished someone would speak honestly about fear and doubt when she was younger. She agreed with one condition. She would keep it simple. Standing in front of the group felt different from performing. There were no keys to hide behind, just her voice. She spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. She told them she had once believed talent was something you were either born with or not. She said she learned that staying quiet can sometimes feel safe, but it can also keep you stuck. People listened closely. Some nodded. A few smiled softly. Afterward, several stayed behind to thank her. One person said they had been waiting years to start again. Another said they were tired of telling themselves it was too late. She went home that night feeling humbled. Music had opened doors she never knew existed. Her teaching continued to grow. But she kept it limited so she wouldn't lose the joy of playing for herself. She learned how to say no without guilt, a skill she'd never had before. One evening, a former coworker came to one of her small performances. They admitted they'd never expected her to be so good. The words were meant as a compliment. They carried an old echo. She smiled politely and thanked them. Later, alone, she thought about that comment. Not with anger, but with clarity. People often judge based on what they see, not what someone carries inside. She had done it to herself too. The difference now was that she no longer needed to correct anyone. Her music spoke clearly enough. At home, she began recording simple versions of her pieces. Not for fame or attention, just to capture moments. She listened back sometimes, noticing how much her playing had changed. It sounded calmer. More grounded, there were still moments of doubt. quiet ones. They appeared when she was tired or overwhelmed, but doubt no longer decided her direction. It was just a visitor, not a guide. One night, she dreamed she was back in that first small apartment playing alone in the dark. But this time, the walls slowly faded away, and the sound traveled outward without resistance. She woke up feeling peaceful. Weeks later, she was invited to help organize a community music night. Not as the main performer, but as someone others trusted. She helped set schedules, encourage nervous performers, and remind them to breathe. Watching others step onto the stage brought back memories. She recognized the tight shoulders, the shaky hands. She met each person with kindness when the night ended. Several performers thanked her for making them feel safe. That word stayed with her, safe. She realized music had given her that feeling long before anyone else had. Now she was passing it on. On a quiet afternoon, she sat at her piano and played without thinking. No plan, no audience, just sound. The notes flowed easily, shaped by years of patience and persistence. She understood something clearly then. Success did not mean becoming someone else. It meant becoming more herself. The world had not suddenly changed its expectations. People still doubted, still assumed, still judged, but she no longer lived inside those expectations. As evening fell, she closed the piano and looked around her room. The worn bench, the scattered papers, the familiar space that once felt too small. It felt just right now. She thought back to the first note she had played in front of others. How it had shaken her. How it had opened everything. That note had not proven she was perfect. It proved she was brave, and bravery, she had learned, was something that grew each time you chose not to hide. She turned off the light and prepared for sleep, calm and content. Tomorrow would bring more work, more music, more ordinary moments, and she would meet them all as herself, seen, heard, and finally at peace.